one of the big challenges of taking context seriously is not just saying we need to understand what's going on now. What is going on now is always a product of a whole stream of things that have gone on in the past. And oftentimes the institutional imperatives that we face are very present tense oriented and they're very willfully indifferent at best, oftentimes, to taking a serious look in the rearview mirror to understand how and why we got to the particular place that the current stakeholders to any negotiation find themselves. So in a due diligence sense, one needs to have a really good understanding of context understood historically, but also recognizing as a second follow-up to that, that how history is told and by whom it's told and how people come to understand who they are as a people is usually itself a very contested process. There isn't a singular view of all of that. But that's part of what taking history seriously would entail as well, is recognizing that people have different interests in being able to articulate a particular version of how we became we, and who is we exactly and who is not us is all a function of history, is a function of how different groups come to understand themselves as having a shared citizenship, a shared elective affinity with one another. But another key thing about understanding history is recognizing just how non-linear it is, that we get to a world in which things that we now take for granted in OECD countries, like that everyone can vote, for example, we think that sort of we have no real conception of, because we've never lived it. Most people who are alive today have no real lived experience of what it's like to live in a world of being a non-citizen. We're still 2 centuries after Mary Wollstonecraft's book on the rights of women, still imperfectly realized in OECD countries today. So it takes a long, painfully long time for any of these things to be achieved, and they don't happen just for the baseline and a follow-up that one can trace and assume that we got from here to there in a straight line. One of the characteristics in particular of the most contentious forms of political change is that they follow what we might call a J-curve, that they get worse before they get better. And a lot of what we know from work on social accountability, on trying to gender-based violence, both in an empirical sense of just how you would measure something like this and being able to track it consistently over time to be able to show that there was net of other things going on in the world, some positive impact associated with what you're doing, that many of these interventions just really take either a long time before there is finally a change that's measurable and observable, or, as I said, things get worse before they get better. And a good historical sensibility helps get the expectations right, because I think if people imagine that, oh, we can build the rule of law, right, and we can do that in a 5-year project. Well, there's no country in the world ever that did that in 5 years. Certainly took 500 years for anything like that to happen in what we now regard as the OECD rich countries. And sure as heck didn't get there in a straight line. I mean, every single country that went through a rapid period of social change, there was a revolution at some point when one particular group of people fought very powerfully for change, and oftentimes a more powerful group tried to suppress that. And all the major revolutions of the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, all these revolutions all happened when things were getting better, not when they were getting worse. And they all led to very violent resistance on the parts of powerful people to stop the advances of something we would now want to regard as a progressive social change. So history matters then in a sense of understanding context in the broader due diligence kind of sense, and recognizing just how contested claims about how any group came to be the group that it now is, how that actually happened, and recognizing that in itself is a contested process, but recognizing just deeply how non-linear most of the change processes have been and still are in the Middle East right now, or let's take one graphic example, like, is democracy working in there? Or how would you know? Or is it just the nature of these things that it's just going to take decades for these things maybe to work out? And what makes it really hard from an evaluation standpoint is that you don't know when you're at the bottom of a J curve. If you're a social activist doing what you're doing to advance women's rights, to advance to gay rights, whatever. I mean, all these issues take a long period of time, and it's never clear whether you're on a fool's errand and you should shut down because what you're doing is just empirically wrong and just a dumb idea, and the project or tool or instrument you're trying to work with is really blunt and it's just not going to do what you are asking it to do, and so you need to change and figure out some other way of doing things. Or whether, like Nelson Mandela, you've just got to persist bravely in obscurity and in jail if necessary for 27 years until finally you're vindicated as being a champion of the end of apartheid, and history is suddenly very kind to you as a conquering hero for having bravely changed an evil system. And it's when you're at the bottom of the J curve and you're never sure whether you've actually hit bottom or whether there's another levels to go, or whether you should just bravely hang in there and hope that you are vindicated after the fact, right? And some of the the ending of the divine right of kings, all of these things that we now regard historically as being crucial at building the rule of law, which is an essential component of all of that, initiating war tribunals to create laws of war. I mean, all those things just didn't happen overnight. They happened only at the tail end of a very bloody process of people trying very bravely to figure out a slightly better way of doing these things. And if you look at the World Bank is part of the United Nations system. The United Nations system was built on the failures of the rubble of the League of Nations, and it's amazing to read the stories about what Roosevelt and Churchill and all the people that were trying desperately in the midst of World War II to figure out a legal global arrangement that would prevent these kinds of meltdowns from happening. And the only precedent they've got is the League of Nations, and they're in the middle of a war and not clear whether it's going to go on for another 2 months or another 2 years or 20 years. That's just, how do you function in that space? Right? And so that's what leadership then becomes, is what very brave people are willing to do to be able to cast their lot with, in this case, something that had demonstrably not worked the first time around, the League of Nations, dealing with the Hitlers and Stalins of the world and hoping that you're now enacting a legal arrangement that's somehow going to hold water and enable reparations when peace eventually comes, to be able to create a legitimacy about the cessation of war. Those are dramatic examples, but I think what we're doing at a much more modest and humble level in development is just versions of that. You're trying to bring about an equitable justice system where people have no lived experience of that, or have been told this is the right way to do things, but have very little confidence that was ever going to be something they can enjoy. You're trying to change how power is managed in a societies where electoral reform or elections of any kind are just not conducted, or have conducted so badly that people only associate them with being part of the problem, not part of the solution. Those kind of changes, it's never at all obvious whether you're, whatever it is you claim to be doing in the name of building the rule of law, enhancing the quality of justice systems, or in building better electoral systems, whether what you're doing is making the situation better or making it worse. All of which is to say, there's just a really crucial moral component to all of this. These aren't nothing we do in that space really is exclusively a technical fix. It's important that we have good legal binds and expertise in contributing to all of those, but if getting a deft policy in place was the solution to these things, we would have figured that out a long time ago.